Good evening, and welcome to my How Healthy Are You weekly educational podcast. My name is Dr. Thomas Brewer. I'm a PhD chemist, and for this week's podcast, I'm going to be talking about apple cider vinegar and a special way of breathing that most of us do incorrectly. First thing I wanted to mention, though, are the sales for this month of November, and both the fish oil, which is pharmaceutical purity omega-3 fatty acids, and the amino acids, which are designed for hair, skin, and weight loss. They're both 40% off. So 40% off both the fish oil and the amino acids. Now, the first topic I wanted to talk about, I mentioned a little bit about this last week, and that is the consumption of apple cider vinegar. And what's happened is we've all been exposed to a lot of misinformation and disinformation about the benefits of apple cider vinegar. So I'm going to go into what's really happening when we consume apple cider vinegar. Now, it's not all bad, but it's much worse than you think, because most of us think apple cider vinegar is good for us. If I took 10 people, 9 out of the 10 are going to say apple cider vinegar is good for you. They've read it somewhere. But it's actually just a bit of propaganda. Apple cider vinegar is simply acetic acid that's made from apples. Now, most vinegars are made from grapes and other sources, and the apple cider vinegar, if compared to the other sources, is way better, definitely better for you. But that doesn't mean apple cider vinegar or any vinegar is really good for us. So most vinegars we think we're not consuming vinegar, when in actuality there's vinegar in ketchup and a large amount. Ketchup has mainly vinegar and sugar. Barbecue sauce, same thing, mainly vinegar and sugar. Pretty much all salad dressings have some form of vinegar in them. A lot of people put vinegar on foods, they add it to soups. They just consume it naturally, thinking it's good for you. Now, I will say if you use any vinegar sparingly, you're not going to have problems. But when you consume vinegar on a regular basis, especially if you're consuming a tablespoon or more per day versus a tablespoon per month, you will have problems. You'll definitely and eventually have intestinal problems, because that's what happens when one consumes any vinegar on a regular basis, or too much of it on a regular basis. So we've been told that vinegar is good for acne, and it actually isn't. It's actually bad for acne. We've been told it's good for endometriosis. It's bad for endometriosis. Celiac, which is thyroid issues, we're told it's good. It's actually bad for it. In fact, if you're really sick, if you have any sort of health problem, do not consume any vinegar, and that would include apple cider. So people also consume apple cider vinegar thinking it's good for acid reflux and also weight loss. And most people really believe this, but the opposite is really true. And I'll go into that in just a few minutes. Now, when you consume apple cider vinegar and it's a small amount and you feel good doing it, or you get some sort of relief, it is benefiting you. But don't be so protective about consuming apple cider vinegar and thinking you've got to do it and it's the only thing keeping you healthy. There's something else keeping you healthy. It's not the apple cider vinegar. Apple cider vinegar is better than the other vinegars, like I said, and that's because it has more minerals in it. And those minerals are from the big trees that have to support apples, all that weight, and they draw a lot of minerals from the soil, and that's the big benefit of apple cider vinegar. Now, here's the science behind the problems. Apple cider vinegar and all vinegars are really acetic acid. They're a medium strength acid. It's not as strong as the hydrochloric acid in your stomach, but it's nonetheless an acid. And the bacteria in our gut, and this is mainly the bad bacteria, this would be the parasitic bacteria, the yeast, and various mold, if you have mold, or fungal forms, they all create acid. And when you add more acid to a system that is already making acid, that would be the bad bacteria in our gut, that's what leads to urinary tract infections, yeast infections, sore throats, irritable bowel disease, and all the other diseases of the intestines, like Crohn's and ulcerative colitis and things like that. That is something that can be traced to too much acid in the gastrointestinal system. Where'd the acid come from? The wrong bacteria, all right? And that's why I tell people to take probiotics if I see parasites in their blood when I do a blood microscopy, and sure enough, they might have irritable bowel disease or a yeast infection or something like that. But if I take it a step further, these bad bacteria make acid, and then we just make it worse by adding more acid to a system that has too much acid. So if you have excess parasitic bacteria, yeast, fungus in your gut, then you have excess acid in your gut because that's what those bacteria produce. And then you just make the problem worse by adding more acid in the form of vinegar, which is acetic acid. Another example is strep, a common bacteria. It actually thrives in excess acid. Now, the rest of the chemistry behind vinegar is, if you think of a pickle, vinegar acts as a preservative, and what it does is it replaces water in various cells, like the cells of a cucumber when you have a pickle and you pickle it. It drives the water out and replaces it with itself, which is acetic acid. And in essence, when you consume any vinegar, you're consuming a food preservative. But you're not supposed to be eating food preservatives. And that's a big problem because you're essentially consuming a food preservative when you think you're consuming something healthy. So when you drive water out of cells and replace it with acetic acid, that is very bad for hydration. So essentially you've dehydrated your cells, which is you're dehydrating the life of your body. And without that water, enzymes can't activate. Remember, enzymes need water, they need the right temperature, they need the right pH, and they need vitamins or coenzymes. So water is a big part of enzyme activation, and the consumption of excess acid in the form of acetic acid or any vinegar is just going to hinder enzyme activation. So it's very detrimental to the body. Now, some people think they're losing weight when they consume apple cider vinegar, and this is part of the propaganda. But really what's happening is you've dehydrated yourself, and you'd think, well, that's not so bad. But in the process of dehydrating yourself, you've concentrated toxins where the water was in your cells. So the water's been replaced, water in your cells has been replaced by acetic acid and toxins. So you're just concentrating toxins in your cells and dehydrating yourself. Not a good thing. Long term, you're going to have health problems. The other thing people believe is when they consume apple cider vinegar or any vinegar, it suppresses their appetite. This is a temporary phenomenon, and the chemistry or the science behind this is when you consume vinegar, the stomach tries to protect itself from this excess acid, so it makes mucus. And the stomach glands that make hydrochloric acid have to actually go into overdrive because of this excess mucus. So in the beginning, you'll have excess hydrochloric acid, and you'll be able to digest food because the hydrochloric acid activates the protease enzyme. So everything's good temporarily until those stomach glands wear out, and then you have trouble making hydrochloric acid. And acetic acid is not going to work to activate protease enzymes. So you'll end up with a lot of problems down the road. So in summary, if you like apple cider vinegar, you like the flavor, you want to take it a very, very short term, or you get some very short-term relief, by all means do it. But it is not something to consume long-term. Now, I had a gallstone flush plan, and it involved vinegar. And one of them is a flush, and the other is just if you're in trouble having a gallstone attack, you would consume some apple cider vinegar and water until the pain from the attack went away. This is a temporary use of apple cider vinegar because it's so acidic, and acid will ionize or dissolve stones. Stones are just a form of ions that are not as charged as they should be, and so they end up a solid. So apple cider vinegar in an emergency situation, by all means, go for it. But it is not something that is good for you, and definitely not something to utilize long term. In essence, it's bad for us, but like all the misinformation out there and propaganda, we've been told numerous times from numerous authorities that it's good for you. Well, send those authorities to me, and I'll set them straight. The other thing I wanted to mention was something that's really important for health, and most all of us are missing it. If you were to think of the main aspects of weight loss or overall health, you would think there would be diet in there. Diet's extremely important for our health. Exercise, physical exercise, stretching and balance exercises and things like that, very valuable for our limbs and skeletal system and muscles and nervous system. But the third component is how we breathe. So diet, exercise, and breathing are your three components for health. And most of us just think, well, diet and exercise is everything. but it's only 2 of the 3. This podcast is not about a breathing exercise. I've got videos on breathing exercises on YouTube. They're on my Facebook page. And this isn't about a breathing exercise to relax or for mental focus or before some athletic event. It's not about a breathing exercise. It's about how you breathe all the time. It turns out that when you open your mouth and breathe in, as opposed to breathing in through your nose, there's a lot of health benefits that you lose and a lot of problems that you gain. So when you breathe in through your nose and keep your mouth closed, the air must go through your sinus cavity. And it is there that it gets humidified and conditioned. So therefore, you are essentially breathing much better air when you breathe in through your nose than through your mouth. What happens is when you breathe through your mouth and with your mouth open throughout the day, it leads to snoring at night, sleep apnea, and even a problem with asthma, meaning it makes the asthma worse. But especially snoring and sleep apnea. If you know anyone that has a snoring problem all the way up to sleep apnea, teach them and tell them to keep their mouth closed and start breathing with their nose. So they're going to be doing nose or nasal breathing. Now, it's also good to breathe in and out through the nose, meaning keep the mouth closed the entire time, or breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth. But either way, breathe in through the nose. The more you do this, the more you won't have to think about it. Now, it's hard to do this when you're talking, but if you're just sitting somewhere, you're on your phone, you're on your computer, you're watching television, whatever you're doing, if you're not talking to someone, keep your mouth closed and breathe in through your nose. So the other thing I noticed when I look at people's blood under the microscope, I'll see these black lines or spicule stress strands. They're actually made from proteins. They're called spicules. But often they are caused from mouth breathers, people that take deep breaths and open their mouth and expand their chest, as opposed to people that breathe in through their nose and expand their diaphragm or their gut, and their chest doesn't expand. So it leads to these physical stress strands. So I can look in someone's blood, and I know if they're mouth breathers or not, and if they're having a detrimental effect from mouth breathing. So I have an example of how beneficial this is, and a lot of track or running coaches will tell the runners to take a gulp of water, hold it in their mouth, and run around the track. Well, that forces them to only breathe in and out through their nose. And then at the end of the lap, they have to spit the water back into a cup to prove that they didn't swallow it and breathe through their mouth. And what happens is these athletes get very efficient with their oxygen utilization. And that's the athletic performance side of this. But on the health side, it's the same thing. When you utilize oxygen efficiently, your health will improve. And actually, in line with the vinegar talk, oxygen is very alkaline. So when you utilize oxygen efficiently, such as through nose breathing versus mouth breathing, when you inhale with your nose, you get very efficient with oxygen. That is alkaline. And it's generally good not to have excess acid in the body unless the body needs the acid, like when we're digesting food. But the ability for the body to become alkaline when it needs to is of utmost importance, and oxygen plays a role in that. So utilizing oxygen in an effective manner, such as breathing in and out through your nose, is something that will benefit everyone's health. So you'll notice your problems will diminish to a certain extent. It's something very easy, and it doesn't cost you anything. It's just something that is not taught, and there's no money in teaching people to breathe in and out through their nose for health. No one's going to make any money on that, so therefore the information is not shared. But it's shared here. So that's all I have for this week's podcast. Please let me know if you have a topic you want me to cover on a future podcast. And until then, thank you for listening.